Go4Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gert.
Welcome to today's Go4Leadership episode. I have with me Zoe Dunning, and she will be our guest today in the show.
Go4Leadership interviews.
Welcome, Zoe.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here today.
Awesome. Perfect. Maybe, Zoe, you can give us a quick glimpse. What is your, let's say, you have been your history so far, and maybe you can give us a short introduction of yourself to the audience.
Sure thing. So I'm talking to you from Oakland, California, where I've lived for the last almost 30 years, but I'm originally from a town of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, just north of Chicago. And when I decided what college to go to, I just chose to pursue a military career. So I attended the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis. I did that because I wanted a college education that was about more than just education, but also about developing leadership skills. And upon graduation from the academy, I served in the Navy, 6 years of active duty and 16 in the reserves. And after active duty, I went on to pursue an MBA at Stanford University Graduate School of Business. And since then, I've been doing primarily consulting. And I started out in kind of more supply chain, operational type consulting. But more recently, in the last 15 years or so, I've really focused on change management, leadership development. How I facilitate a course now at Stanford Business School called Interpersonal Dynamics. So I'm much more interested in kind of the human aspects of leadership development, of influential leadership. So that's kind of my sort of professional career. And then on the side, I also do quite a bit of activism. So while I served in the Navy, I was one of the leaders in the efforts to open up the military to allow gay and lesbian service in the military. So I had about 18 years of activism there, leading an organization called Service Members Legal Defense Network to work with, providing legal services to those impacted, but then eventually changing the policy of the United States Congress.
Wow, cool. Thank you. So let's maybe also jump directly into the topic of leadership. And as our listeners know, the first question we always ask is, how would you define leadership, or what does leadership mean to you in particular?
It's hard to really have one definition because I really am a fan of situational leadership, right? What type of leadership style you use and what is important and how you weigh it depends so much on the situation, the urgency of the situation, the complexity of it, the people that you're leading, the size of the team. So for me, adaptability and that flexibility is really critically important. You can't have a one-size-fits-all leadership style. You have to, as we've seen with COVID-19, right? You have to adapt to things that you probably never could have expected. But I think some key tenets that are always important are, for me at least, is leadership by example. I can't stand hypocrisy. I can't stand leaders who, say do one thing and then you watch them and they do something else, right? So I think walking the talk, leading by example is a core component of anyone's leadership style. I also feel like feedback is an area that, in any corporation, American or global, it's critically important to tie the team together and to understand how each other works, right? So creating a psychologically safe environment where feedback is openly given and received, and we are there to help each other succeed is also a key tenet of leadership. How do you create an environment where people can speak up and speak out? Because if they're, coming from a place of fear, or they're coming from a place of worrying about retaliation, should they sort of point out that something's not working, then you're never going to be successful in your organization. And then finally, I would just say integrity above, all else. It kind of goes with, leadership by example, but integrity in what you do, doing the right thing, even if it's difficult, doing the difficult right thing over the easy wrong thing, and embedding that in your organization, rewarding and creating a culture of integrity by rewarding behavior that demonstrates integrity and having consequences for behavior that does not demonstrate integrity. I would say those are some of the key tenets of leadership for me.
Wow, I like them a lot. And just to jump into the first one, leading by example, we have done a similar experiment, let's say, with putting a banana into an elevator at the morning of the office hours, and unfortunately, the banana was still at the end of the day in the elevator. So I think everybody is part of a team in an organization, and to show how you want to have people behave in certain situations is not just overlook the banana in the elevator, it's really picking it up and put it into the garbage. So how would you say you can show this kind of little examples and also demonstrate to the team that this is now exactly how you want to have them behave? So how do you have you done that in the history, or how would you consult people being in, let's say, new to leadership roles?
It's harder now with the virtual world because our interactions are so curated, right? It's like, I am going to interact with you in this meeting on my calendar, specific time. And a lot of times those leadership by example moments, even with that banana example, is sort of the it's not the tile, it's the grout between it, right? It's those moments in between when you're just sort of being yourself and people are observing you, in your sort of natural habitat, so to speak. I think if you want an organization that is willing to be open and admit mistakes, then you have to admit mistakes yourself. So I think leaders using, I would call strategic vulnerability. I don't think we want to have leaders who are like all the time vulnerable, right? But I think demonstrating vulnerability, being able to speak up and say when you've been wrong, I think goes a long way. I also think that listening, like if you have, think about it yourself. What leaders have you had that you really enjoyed working for? They're leaders that really listen to you. They don't just tell you what to do, but they listen to you. They give you time. They ask questions. And I think you can create that kind of an environment by doing it yourself, right? Element of curiosity, inquiry, challenging assumptions, and listening to the answers. That's how people feel empowered. That's how people feel like their voices are heard, like they're contributing to the overall mission of the organization.
I absolutely agree, and I think you mentioned, of course, a headache of all of us now within the Corona crisis, working a lot of in virtual setups. I think one thing that also is hard to experience, which is integrity, right? Because everything gets so somehow close, but at the same time distanced, and it's so hard to kind of, with all the information going around, show honesty and integrity, which I think are the kit that helps us bringing, or let's say that I always say trust is like the kit between human beings, and integrity is a big component in it. So how would you describe to facilitate, let's say, those kind of, because integrity is also something that you show by example, right? It's nothing that you have or don't have. It's showed by situations, and you gain it also a part of your team. How would you give advice to show integrity in this kind of distance situations?
That's a tough one. I mean, I don't know that integrity is degraded any by the virtual environment more so than the in-person. I think it's about making tough decisions. And I think it's, like I said before, about admitting when you've made a mistake. And whether that is as an individual leader or as an organization. The ability for an organization to say like, hey, we thought that this was the best path forward. And we figured out at some point in time that this wasn't the best path forward. It may be a reorganization. It may be a new product launch. It may be, a merger acquisition. There might be a point in time where you're like, actually, this was a mistake. We're recognizing now that some of our assumptions going in weren't right, and we're going to change course, and we're going to change direction. To have the integrity to do that and not just follow your sunk cost and say, we're going to continue forward because that was the decision that was made, and we're going to move forward. I think integrity is making that tough decision to say we're going to change course, or we're going to change direction, or we're going to decide something differently. I think that's one way of demonstrating it in the virtual or in the in-person world. I think another way of demonstrating integrity is staying true to your word. So if you make a commitment to your staff, if you make a commitment to your team, you need to follow through with that. You need to actually do it. And it can be in the smallest of items. If you say at the end of a meeting, I'll send out the minutes by the end of the day. Send out the minutes at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
Say I'm going to meet with so-and-so and get back to you. Get back to them, right? It's those little, sort of micro transactions that build that trust and build that leadership, because people know that you're accountable. People know that if you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it. And that builds, if you look at Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, right? You have trust, and then there's accountability. And it really is critically important to any team to know that, like we say in the military, we would say, I've got your 6, which means if you think of, your surroundings as a clock, 6 is what's behind you. So saying that I've got your 6 means I've got your back. And I think when you're part of a team where everyone's got each other's back, that you're going to be held accountable. You're going to say, and you're going to do what you're going to say. I think that goes a long way with creating a very highly effective team.
Absolutely agree, and I like the examples that you have given. So I always say, if I commit, and a commitment is a strong word in English, right? So if I commit to send out the minutes today, I will do that, even if it takes me till midnight to get them out, because I said I will send them out. So do you think that COVID also changed this a little bit? Because I have seen so many people being much more open in sharing that maybe they have taken a wrong decision. I remember pre-COVID times where always it was much more, let's say, popular to maybe hide away by showing that there was a mistake done or trying to escape that. But it's obvious that with COVID, there's so much uncertainties. There's so many, let's say, wheels that can shuffle around, or situations that are unforeseeable and unpredictable, that there is a certain, let's say, improved openness for also acknowledge that failure is just part of the game.
I think we have been put into a situation where in order to just survive day to day, we have to give each other a lot more grace than I think we did before. Mm-hmm. And there's also an interesting intimacy in Zoom where we're actually looking at people's living rooms or their bedrooms or their offices. Like we are literally in someone else's home. And I think we all know that we're struggling. We're struggling, either we have a family member who's ill, or we're struggling because we have to homeschool, or we're struggling with our own sort of isolation if you live alone. I think we're handling it with a little bit more grace, which is giving us a little bit more space to open up, to be a little bit more vulnerable, to admit mistakes, to really reach out and connect with each other as humans as opposed to just coworkers. I love being on a Zoom call. I think before COVID, if I were on a call with someone and their kid was screaming in the background, I probably would have been annoyed, right? I would have been like, come on, man, this is a business meeting. Can't you, But now I just have so much empathy for everyone who's trying to juggle, children or pets or schedules or, family members or, not being able to spend holidays with their families, whatever it may be. We're just having a bit more empathy and grace with one another, which I think is one of the benefits of COVID, unfortunately. One of the side effects of coming out of this is just we see each other more as humans. We have a little bit more capacity and compassion. And I think, going back to the meeting minutes thing, yeah, I may have made a commitment that I'm going to do the meeting minutes tonight. And guess what? Like I was exhausted at the end of the day. After 12 hours of Zoom, I just couldn't get to it. And maybe I can't do it till tomorrow, but I'll send out a note and I'll just say, hey guys, I'm sorry. I know I said I'd get the minutes out today. I can't do it. As long as there's nothing that's like urgent coming out of those meeting minutes, right? Which there rarely is. I'll get it to you tomorrow. And I think nowadays we're like, okay, thanks for letting us know.
But exactly, this is as well accountability, because you showed accountability to say, I knew that was my task, but there's a good reason not to do it tonight, right? So I think that completely buys into it. Let's switch gears a little bit. I'm also very interested about the leadership skills required in the military. So one of my former bosses was ex-military, and I actually liked his leadership style because it was quite military flavored, let's say this way, but you could exactly know what was the expectation. So it was really precise, and you knew when you followed this, let's say, task that it would be a success. So can you outline a little bit your experience, let's say, maybe the difference between the leadership skills required in the military field and maybe in the more, let's say, out there business fields? If there is any difference, I don't know.
I think there's a couple of things that I would differentiate folks who've served in the military. And I do a lot of work with veterans groups. I'm part of I'm in the advisory board of a group called Vets in Tech, which helps veterans who are transitioning out of the military get into the tech sector. I also serve on the California Veterans Board. And I love veterans. I just think that they're some of the most amazing can-do, resilient leaders around. And I think some of the things that I would differentiate, sometimes people think of military leadership as like very directive and, top down and very command and control. And I've actually found military leadership to be very different, because if you think about Navy SEALs out in the field or a submarine commander, like you have to make life or death decisions, and you have to be very adaptable to what the situation is that's coming. You can't be overly formal and structured. You have to be able to adapt to what's going on. So I actually find military leaders very pragmatic and very adaptable to what's before them.
Agree.
The accountability aspect, I think, rings very true. When I was at the Naval Academy, when I was going through plebe summer, you had 5 responses. Yes, sir, no, sir, aye, sir, which means I will do whatever you just told me to do. We're now able to say, I don't know. You're able to say, I'll find out, sir. So if you didn't know, you had to say, I'll find out, sir, or no excuse, sir. Those are the only responses that you were allowed. So there's a sense of like, you can't just be like, I don't know, sorry. Like you had to either say, and you couldn't have excuses. It was just like, either you did it or you didn't, there is no try, there's only do. The last thing I'll say is the sense of teamwork. And I'm going to tell you a quick story. So my plebe summer, I was 18 years old. I was in Annapolis, Maryland. It was, super hot, super humid. And, you're running from evolution to evolution. And I shared a room with 2 roommates, and I came back to my room one hot afternoon, and I got to my room first. And in the military, you call a bed a rack. And my rack was completely missing, just gone, like no mattress, no sheets, nothing. Just like the springs on the bed were there. But my 2 roommates' beds were made and sitting there untouched. And I was so confused. I had absolutely no idea what had happened or what was going on. So I ran over, I went down to my squad leader's door, knocked on his door, requested permission to come aboard. And I was like, sir, request permission to ask a question. He said, go ahead, Midshipman Dunning. I said, sir, do you know the whereabouts of my rack? And he's like, yes, actually, look outside your window. Your rack committed suicide. And I was like, what? So I run back to my room. I look out the window. Sure enough, 3 stories down is my mattress with all the sheets splayed out and it had been thrown out the window. So I running back to my squad leader's door, and I knocked on the door and said, request permission to come aboard, request permission to ask a question. Sir, why did my rack commit suicide? And he said, your rack was made perfectly. And it was so ashamed that it had not taught your roommates how to make a proper rack that it threw itself out the window.
Wow.
And at first I was super angry because I was like, wait a minute, let me get this right. I made my bed perfectly and I'm getting punished. And my 2 roommates who made their racks poorly are not getting punished. I do not understand this. But what he was trying to teach me was the concept of teamwork, that we're only as strong as our weakest link. That if I knew how to make a proper bed, I needed to teach my roommates how to make a proper bed. And so I was the one that was getting punished, because if I had that knowledge and skill, I needed to share it. And so that's a lesson I've carried with me since I was 18 years old, about teamwork and about if helping others out who may be struggling, and sharing your knowledge and your skills and your talent. I just can't imagine that happening in a civilian school or in a civilian workplace, that, sort of lesson around teamwork. We're all taught to like stand out and excel individually, but this was really about how do you make your entire team excel.
Yeah, and I think it's some of those points where it's maybe easily said, but it's hard to really get it done. And I think that's a great lesson to to foster really think every individual that only as a team you can win. And like you said, it really is about that the one that has the skills to share it, and at the end, so everybody can get a little bit of it as well. And maybe the next time the situation is the other way around, that you have somebody that shares his skills and his knowledge how to do stuff. And I think that's part of a team and also of a successful company, because you will not be succeed as an individual in this complex world. It's evident.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Maybe you can also share a little bit how, as we have touched, let's say the military aspect, and I have to say that one was really one of the best experience I had from a leader perspective. How, let's say, can maybe non-military leaders benefit from things they can maybe copy from military leaders out of your experience? So what maybe they can use, let's say?
Well, I'll turn the question back on you for a second. Now, you said that you worked for a military leader and you liked it, and you gave some examples. What did you learn from that military leader?
That's an interesting switch of the gears. Sorry, but I have to say it was actually all these aspects. So he was able to form the first time out of a heterogeneous group a real team. Mm-hmm. And actually, this team is still till now still in touch, and we are talking about 8, 9, 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So something that I would definitely say it was one of the best times I've had. So he was clear in his demands. It was clear how we wanted the team to manage to or to lead to. So you had a clear direction. It was a clear team formed, and it was a clear way how to execute it. Of course, sometimes with mistakes, but we could win together, and we could lose together. And I think that's something I have not experienced that often. So we could shout out and say we agree to disagree, but at the next time we could have a beer and everything would be in order, and we say, well, that's the mission, let's go for it. And I think that's certain aspects that have had a huge impact for the team.
Yeah.
In particular, in a very difficult, challenging time. So revenues have been declining, profits has been really poor. So we really had to manage a tough turnaround, and there has been we have and execute really tough decisions, which is not easy. But if you have somebody that guides you through these difficult times with an outlook that if we go through, we can see, let's say, at the end, a light at the tunnel. So and forming a strong team that fights for each other without questioning, is he now, let's say, putting the knife in my back, or is he really part of the team supporting me the next time that I need support? And I think that really was the key driver of the success at the end.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I'm glad that you learned all of that. And I do think, in my experience in the military, it's about servant leadership, and you really have to know your team, because you're asking them to make huge sacrifices and put their lives on the line, literally in battle. So you have to know them inside and out. You need to know what motivates them, what doesn't. You need to know where their vulnerabilities are, where their strengths are. And so I think that's one lesson that any non-military leader can learn from the military, is that how important it is to really understand your team, understand what makes them tick, what makes them connect, and to invest in those. People make fun of like team building. It's like, oh God, it's another team building exercise or team building game or whatever. But it's so critically important, because you can be super task oriented, and sometimes you can build teamwork around a task and around a mission. But it's that interconnectivity. It's that, those, firing nervous systems, because you are overall a team. Like that is, in the military, it's the same mission, team, self, right? So it's about, how do we create those connections? And you create those by getting to know one another through, asking questions, through self-disclosure, one of the things we teach at Stanford Business School is about you create greater connection by, self-disclosure so people can get to know you a little bit better, but also creating an environment where you can give and receive feedback. And that way you get to know a little bit more about yourself because you get to hear from others how you're coming across and what's working and what's not. So self-disclosure and feedback are two critical components and sort of creating that connective tissue within a team and allowing you to know one another in a really fundamental way.
Perfect.
Go4Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gert.
Thank you, Zoe. I liked your view on leadership and also the glimpse we have had regarding the military aspect and the learnings we actually can absorb. I think that's a huge benefit for our listeners. So thanks for being our guest today, and it was a real pleasure having you in the chat.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it quite a bit.
Awesome. Perfect.
Go4Leadership.